Solar Sands. Like and sub. Follow my example.
These paintings have been viewed by undoubtedly thousands of
Liminal
people.
spaces? Are you asking what liminal spaces are? Liminal spaces are... Actually, I don't know how to describe them, but there are places that look like they should not exist, or they should exist in a video game sort of space, where it's you get a really weird feeling when you're in the space. Like, have you ever been to like a department store where it's completely empty and you feel completely out of space? That's how I would describe the bare bones of a liminal space. And I'm sure this video will describe it better than I will. It feels like a pocket into a different dimension, kind of like a weird feeling. Alternate reality spaces, basically, yeah. In real life.
Maybe millions, but they're rarely seen. They're never really analyzed, they're never really contemplated, but they are works of art nonetheless. Someone sat down, planned them, designed them, painted them, and finalized them. To some of you, they might feel off, like they haven't been put into the right context, or there's something very big
like
that's
there should be
from
life
them.
there, but there
and that's
isn't.
because there is. This is all background art for Lego sets. One of the very first things you learn about design, this great, seemingly obvious revelation, is that everything that is not
The
from nature
backrooms is a perfect example
Anything
of a
from the
liminal
most
space.
magnificent monument to something as small as a toothpick. Someone somewhere had to sit down, usually sketch out their idea, and develop it. In this case, the art director and illustrator Chris Barrett made these. The reason some of these backgrounds feel off is because they're not really meant to be seen this way. Usually they have a large Lego set in the middle,
Oh, true.
general set information, piece count,
Most of it gets
logos,
covered up.
all this other stuff that obscures about 40 to 50% of it. So when you take all this stuff away, when you remove it from its context,
It looks hauntingly
the result
empty.
is this very empty image. They have no people, not even minifigures. There's not even a focal point, really. This feeling I get from looking at them is loneliness, obviously, but also a kind of odd, very slight, unsettling tinge. As if I'm not really supposed to be looking at these. Because, well, I'm not really. That you may or may not have seen pop up in your recommended. These types of photos, these often low quality, atmospheric, lonely, nostalgic, and in many ways deeply uncanny images, have gathered a small cult following of sorts. The locations that these photos depict, many have referred to as liminal spaces.
I like the music.
The backrooms are probably the biggest, baddest, most famous example of a liminal space. They're basically an idea devised by a very simple creepypasta that has been continuously expanded and made famous through other posts, video games, memes, and YouTube videos. The original post describes
these spaces, by the way, according to the creepypasta, you're trapped in this space and there is no exit. No matter where you go, you're stuck in this place. Have I been to one? I don't think I've ever been to one. I can't imagine wanting to visit a place like this. Like, there's no life around, you know? Creepy. But yeah, I can imagine your senses being amped to 200% just because everything you see here is almost completely visual, but also lack of a visual, because everything's just kind of the same and completely quiet. So I can imagine, like, you start hearing things and maybe even, like, see things that aren't actually there just because you're overcompensating. But yeah, according to the creepypasta, you get trapped in a place like this because you clip out of reality, and this is like a back room of reality, and you will be trapped here, and there is no exit no matter which direction you run or like no matter where you go. It's like an infinite loop of just this empty room or an empty series of rooms. Pretty crazy stuff. Can you even imagine, man? Like, I don't think I can survive this. Even if just being in here for like a day, like, it'll drive me nuts.
how if you no-clip out of reality, which is a video game term that refers to when a player passes through what are supposed to be physical objects
clipping
and
is
boundaries,
no
you will find
collision.
yourself in an endless maze of rooms, carpet, and fluorescent lights that extends for 600 million square miles. So you're basically trapped there. This photo is usually the go-to image to give someone a good idea of what the backrooms are. It's a photo that depicts the yellow decaying walls and carpet of some old office space or storage room that, to my knowledge, no one knows the true location.
I can hear and smell that photo.
This creepypasta is especially unique because, unlike other stories, the fear for the most part does not come from some mysterious creature. It's the setting itself. There have been a lot of lore-extending posts that try to describe things like levels and such, and that's all fine and dandy, but I think the simplicity of the concept, the visceral idea of being trapped in an uncomfortable place, isolated and permanently cut off from the world you once knew, and that it can just happen randomly,
I think that's actually less scary than a well-lit
disturbing. Now, I call the backrooms the most famous example of a liminal space for defining liminal space, because it gives you a good idea of what I'm trying to get at. Ultimately, if we just look at the etymology of the word, where limen simply means threshold in Latin, we can understand it pretty easily. On Wikipedia, liminality has an anthropology definition that describes the quality of ambiguity or disorientation that occurs in the middle stage of a rite of passage.
I guess that's what
this describes more emotional liminal spaces rather than physical, like a divorce, job loss, or moving to a new place. I think combining these two passages, taking the qualities of a transitional space and the qualities of disorientation, gives us a pretty apt description of these images. To be a transitional space that is unsettling, an empty parking lot, a house that has had all its furniture taken out, a space you shouldn't be in, an abandoned mall, a playground at night, a school long after classes have ended. If you feel something while looking at these images, hell, if you've ever been in these types of places and these types of conditions, and you feel something, you're not alone. Many have claimed the backrooms, or at least the backrooms photo, seem oddly
going to
familiar,
vote and getting like clipped out of reality
with a lot of these liminal space photos. I wanted to really get to the bottom of why this is, really isolate the reason why so many people across the internet, with vastly different memories and experiences, claim that these seemingly loosely connected sets of photos seem so oddly familiar. Even without images attached. And while I understand most of them, there's some I don't get this feeling one of these liminal spaces. Like any target. Just, what do they mean by that? Why just Target? It's just a superstore.
Target at the back
if you said abandoned Target, maybe, but just a Target.
It feels
and then
weird.
Churches in Texas. I've been to churches in Texas. I haven't found anything weird about them. Also, that's far too broad. Do they know how big Texas is? And I hate to agree with a Tumblr post, but I think they're right about this context thing. These places were designed for specific purposes by humans. Even the most obscure, rarely thought over bit of architecture had to be designed and built by someone. And they are designed with a certain context in mind. And when they are taken out of their expected designed context, they can become uncanny. We're seeing another side to something familiar. Context is a fundamental part of how our brains work. Think about all the color and pattern illusions out there that are able to bend shapes and colors simply by changing the context.
What?
Think about all the
These two squares are the same color. What do you mean? As in the two center squares? I can definitely see that. Wait, what? These two squares are the same color. These two squares are the same. You mean the inner squares? Like the green, pink, pink?
Color and pattern illusions out there that are able to bend shapes and colors simply by changing the context. The brain is a context machine.
I think I'm just claustrophobic,
There's a word for this from the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows.
Any closed space that's completely empty makes me super uncomfortable.
Of places left behind. You get that sense that the world was once full of people, but then they all vanish mysteriously, leaving everything running.
That makes me feel very uneasy.
Total abandonment. There's another element that may add to this altered reality feeling. The lighting is especially powerful. Many places are unnaturally lit, either by the atmospheric cast of a streetlight. This auditorium has one light source behind the viewer that only dissipates the further you look on. Through unusual lighting, it accentuates that disorientation. and through more conventional, artificial lighting, it accentuates that familiarity. A vast majority of the lighting is similar to when people take pictures that are not professional. Photos, you can imagine, have been taken with cheap, family-owned cameras. People have often used this word in comment sections to describe this effect of familiarity. Anemoia. Again, from the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. Anemoia is defined as nostalgia for a time you've never known. Others have pondered about the validity of reincarnation. Even more have claimed these heavily edited photos with their unnaturally steep hills, bizarre residential planning, and increased saturation look a lot like backgrounds to kids' television shows.
Yeah, true.
These photos
Teletubbies are actually hella scary when you think about it now.
Bliss default
What is up
wallpaper
with those
for
costumes,
Windows
man?
XP. And why are people nostalgic for that image? Because they used that operating system as kids. These are just playgrounds,
True.
arcades, slides. You ever been to one of those as a kid? Transitional spaces that we don't have time to make mental models of in our brains.
That's actually really
because at the
profound.
time,
It's kind of like spaces that like when you leave home and you go to the shops, right? The journey to the shops is almost like you're on autopilot because you've been on that same journey so many times that like you sort of tune the journey out and your brain is only aware of, hey, I'm getting ready to leave home. And hey, I'm at the shops to do my task. So the spaces in between, you'll most likely forget. But when you, like shown a photo of it like 30 years later, you're like, hey, that's kind of like familiar, but hauntingly unfamiliar. Where do I know this from? So liminal space, that's almost a liminal space. It's kind of like loading, like via autopilot for your brain. That's actually, I'm not sure if I'm making any sense, but yeah, that's what I'm gathering from this. That's kind of interesting.
They seem unimportant, but ultimately necessary. These are the journeys between our destinations.
Exactly.
These kinds of photos,
That's what I mean.
I would assume, don't require any technical skill to pull off. Most of them, I assume, are lit the way
kind
the
of tune it out
photographers
because
found them.
you go there
Many
every
of them
day.
are low quality. Get in, loser. We're gonna go find some liminal spaces.
Is that Matt Pat?
So since it's COVID time, there's a lot of places that we can go to that are pretty empty. This is one such area.
Oh, that's actually pretty good.
And we'll see what kind of photos we can get.
Just use like really old Android
Here's
phone.
our next location.
Get rid of the cars and it'll be super liminal.
Less used mall in the city area. And I'm gonna see what kind of stuff I can find here. Oh yeah, this is definitely the kind of thing
Yeah,
we're
definitely.
looking for in a liminal space. As I expected, finding good, empty, atmospheric locations was the main point of difficulty. But as soon as I went to the mall, it immediately became clear just how common these
but
types
I think
of
that
large
actually the
vacant
videos
spaces
will be a
are
lot more
once you
haunting
eventually find them.
when you hear all
When
the
it
shop
rains,
noises but not
it
see
pours.
anyone. I think
These
that's a
sets
lot
of
more
photos
scary.
may also mostly work on a specific demographic of people. Like I said, if you were born anytime during the 90s or 2000s, and if you're American. Now there's been some threads of people who claim they are not American, and still feel the same thing.
It's because American
and there's no reason
media
to
is
doubt
very
this.
popular even
These
overseas.
kinds of places are not totally exclusive to America.
Yeah.
And there's still
And
American
there's a lot of
media,
American
but I
influence
found
in
this
overseas
interesting
media anyway.
post that made me rethink the universality of this appeal. I wouldn't say it's entirely off the table
You
that
feel
some
for
people
both?
may be manufacturing false memories merely by suggestion. But for me at least, there's more to these images
I feel
than
like
that.
there has to be a
Like
sense
I
of
demonstrated
relatability.
before, I can connect these images to specific memories and similar looking images
For
from
it
my
to work,
childhood.
at least for me.
The most powerful of these images to me is when there is just one or two things off about them. And it's never something that is supernatural, no ghosts or monsters, just little spikes of strangeness that produce this uncanny effect.
Definitely.
For example,
Subtlety's the key.
take this inaccessible waiting area on the second floor of some hotel.
Yeah, that's
A
really
bewildering
weird.
design for a passageway of narrow, cornered walls. This long, prison-like building with a single lit window. This area of
Yeah,
infinitely
I
receding
feel
walls with
these
windows
ones.
installed in them
Don't
for
really like
seemingly
them.
no apparent reason. This underground house with a concrete sky and artificial greenery. This storage or office space with such sparse lighting, you wonder how anyone could work there.
Yeah.
These bits of weirdness produce anxiety, a kind
Yeah.
of impending
Oh my
danger
god,
that
that
is
gave me a
similar
mini
but
heart
more
attack.
powerful to normal liminal space
Oh.
photos. Not only have most of these environments been taken out of their design context, the architecture itself is unnerving.
I know I
If
said
there
this
was
on
a
stream
scale
before.
from
I
normal
don't like
images
dolls.
to weird images we have covered on this channel, it would start with liking
Ugh.
normal average-looking
Now I
photo,
feel really
then
off.
these liminal space photos with one or two things off about them, then art breeder images, then finally complete abstraction. These liminal space photos are a kind of middle ground between what was
What the hell
already
is
a
that
middle
on the
ground
right?
between abstraction and normal. Edited photos are some of the most powerful in this dreamlike aspect. In the realm of traditional painting, there's one artist that comes to mind whose works resemble
behind
liminal
me.
spaces. John Register's paintings of places devoid of people, but instead filled with objects like chairs
There
and
was no one
tables,
there.
give off similar vibes. Just like how human beings designed and built these places, human beings also lived in them, and it's undeniable that they
It feels
weaved a little
weird
bit
that
of
these places that
humanity
should
into
be
them.
inhabited
This might
aren't
have been
inhabited.
someone's childhood
Yet
home,
the lights are
or their
still on.
favorite
I
place
think that's
to
the
play
main
as a
thing.
child. And when they're gone, it's like you can feel a ghost
It's like
remain.
it doesn't feel
kind of
abandoned
eeriness and
because the
sadness.
lights are still on.
These very
But where are the
ordinary
people?
places
I think that's
were
where the
once
uneasiness
full
comes
of
from.
life,
And for me, that's
full
where
of
the closed
stories,
spaces
no
where
matter
there
how
should be people,
insignificant,
but there aren't.
stories
I
that
think
may
that's
never
why
be
it's so
told.
weird to
Hell,
me.
without any describable landmarks, we don't even know for sure what state some of these could be in, or
Yeah.
country, or place on the planet. Sonder is the realization that each random passerby is living a life just as vivid and complex as your own. I
Like
find
you guys
myself
watching right
staring
now.
at these photos and applying this same realization to man-made places. If these walls could talk. I know this is all getting very sentimental, but for me that's the main point of interest. But remember that underground house photo I mentioned earlier? It's actually a real photo of an underground 15,000 square foot bunker in Las Vegas that simulates the changes in night and day
Is that a
through
stripper
artificial
pole?
lights and an artificial environment with painted murals and
Of
fake
course,
trees,
it's Vegas.
a pool, barbecue, putting green. All of this 26 feet underground. It's kind of amazing. I doubt in the search for the backrooms people will find anything close to this kind of anomaly, and yet I still have an intense curiosity for its true location. But it is also the dedicated following that has given significance to the insignificant
I really like small niches
by
like
taking
this.
it out of its design
I find
context.
it really, really interesting, but it's obviously
We are returning to a world
waste
as
of
we
time,
once saw it,
depending how
through
you
the
look at
eyes
it.
of a child. We don't really know how it works or what it means, but we are fascinated by
I'm
it.
just really
Even
into
the
the
most
creepy and
mundane
scary
and
things, I
ordinary
guess.
appears new in our eyes. The world is confusing, and large, and mysterious.
That's actually a really good way of putting it. These liminal spaces are just normal spaces, but you're not supposed to see them. They're supposed to be occupied with things that you're supposed to interact with. Not the spaces themselves, but the things within the spaces. But when you remove the things in the spaces, and all you're left with just the space, it feels really weird, because you're there for a purpose, but the purpose has been removed. All you're left with is basically the space itself, and it makes you feel out of place. I'm not trying to sound smart, by the way. I'm trying to explain to myself, because I'm a bit slow. I'm trying to rationalize these spaces, I guess, myself, and just myself. That's how I feel about the spaces. That was actually a really good video. I enjoyed that. I'll ring the bell. That was Solar Sands, guys. Solar Sands. A hindsight in does anyone remember when you got to school and what life's going on yet?